about the gift of suffering today, which may seem like an oxymoron. Like, does suffering really have a purpose? Is there sacredness in the really intense experience of suffering that just about every one of us goes through? And I want to tie in the conversation around suffering to ayahuasca and what she teaches. Because ayahuasca in particular, of all the medicines, of all the entheogens, she's incredibly unique in that she's not fun times on drugs. You'll never pick up a kid walking down the street high on ayahuasca, because it is innately entwined into the experience of working with her that it's difficult. She's going to take us to our edges. She's going to show us, it's like the first line of that book. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times, right? She is the queen of polarities and duality. So she has a lot to teach us about the purpose of suffering. Isn't it amazing, you all, that a medicine that is an act of suffering itself, when we work with her quite often anyway, has become so prominent in our culture. I know that when I started drinking her 20 years ago, I would have never guessed that she was going to be a medicine that has become pervasive in our culture, because she's not easy. And I can speak for myself that some of the hardest experiences of my life have taken place in the container of an ayahuasca ceremony. And yet I keep going back, as do so many of us, which is magical. I mean, it certainly speaks to our resilience, but I think it speaks to something deeper, that we inherently know that suffering, intensity, darkness, difficulty, it all has a sacred purpose. And I think on a soul level, we're all trying to crack that code of understanding why it is that we suffer, because we all do. Most of us are part of spiritual communities where we have the awareness that suffering is optional, right? There's that beautiful Buddhist quote, something to the effect that pain is required, suffering is optional. We can, from an intellectual perspective, understand that suffering is a choice. It's the relationship to what is happening. But for all of us that have yet to fully crack the code of suffering, that can feel really insulting. You know, when somebody tells me I'm choosing my suffering, on the one hand, I know that there is a truth in that. On the other hand, it's like, how do I choose otherwise? You know, and just understanding that in a mental way doesn't crack the code. But this is where ayahuasca comes in. I have sat with her thousands of times now, several thousand times. I would love to tell you all that after 3,000 doses of ayahuasca, there's no more suffering. Like, no, it's actually not in the least bit true. What has shifted and changed over all these experiences with her is my relationship to suffering. Very simply, she teaches us to say yes to the experience of pain. She teaches us to say yes to the resistance that we feel, to the fear, to the entire spectrum of emotions that we get to experience as conscious human beings. She has reminded me, actually, that it is an honor and a privilege to get angry, to be terrified, to grieve to the depths of my being. That part of the disease of our culture is we've been programmed to think and feel that it is not safe, sane, in any way okay to have these deep experiences of suffering. And yet every single one of us is doing it, which is like pretty crazy, right? That it's a universal experience to suffer, and yet we shame ourselves and each other to express that quite a lot. You get under the beautiful guidance of ayahuasca, and I like to joke that if there's a box inside of us that says, do not look here, you know, that if we're trying to hide from aspects of our trauma and suffering, guess where she's going to go? Maybe not immediately, but certainly eventually, right into the portal of the place that we are most afraid to look. Because that experience of feeling and processing the deepest corners of our psyches is literally liberation. It's literally the way that she helps us to, first of all, find out what we're made of, how powerful we all are, to sit in the experience of emotions, how capable we all are, even though we've been programmed otherwise, most of us, to not trust that we are capable of feeling the deepest, most intense emotions. Not in any way to belittle, the intensity of the process that all of us have in dealing with and integrating our own suffering, as well as the suffering of the entire world. I mean, my goodness, I've had the experience with ayahuasca. I know a lot of you have, where it's like you tap into the core of the suffering of the entire world, the planet, humanity, animals, you name it. And it can feel, there's no words for it, right? It can feel like it's going to totally break and destroy us. And yet, the more we start to lean in and to say yes to the honor and the privilege of feeling these emotions, the more we start to crack the code. And to realize that enlightenment or joy is not living in a world where there is no suffering, because that's not the reality of our world, is it? It's saying yes to it. So if I could summarize in a really profound way what ayahuasca has taught me, it's that suffering is sacred. It's not something to be fixed. It's something to be understood. It's something to be worked with. So and essentially what she has shown me is that suffering is actually the resistance to what is happening, not what is happening itself. And I've had these experiences with her, like sitting deep in the portal, watching the intensity come in, right? And when I breathe into it, there's no suffering. It's intense. It's crazy moment to moment, but there's no suffering. When my mind kicks in and says something like, no, I don't want this, make it stop, and starts to resist, then I start to suffer, because I am saying no to the experience that I'm having. This is a really profound teaching. I personally have had to learn it over and over again, because I resist all kinds of things. We all do, it's okay. But to recognize that it's not us being tortured by some cruel God, that it's actually one of the fundamentally, profoundly powerful experiences of duality, is to resist and to suffer and to learn how to do that differently, to learn how to say yes to being scared and hurt and angry and all of it, because we are honored to get to feel these things. You know that meme that floats around all the time where it shows a picture of a little kid with a boot on his head, and then the next frame of that picture is you can see it's his hand in the boot? This beautifully expresses what ayahuasca is teaching, but she teaches it with such love and reverence that she knows how hard it is to have an experience of suffering, but that we are doing it to ourselves. Yeah? Not to blame us for doing that, not to hold us accountable in any level of shame, but to empower us to do it differently. So the longer I've worked with her, the more I have learned to allow myself to suffer when I need to go there, because it's part of my human experience. Suffering is the pressure cooker by which we all learn to expand beyond it, to be spacious enough to hold the pain. Because when we can say yes to the pain, the grief, the sadness, the anger, the rage, whatever it is, when we can say yes to it, it can flow through us. And while it is a very intense experience, there doesn't have to be suffering. And so every time I work with her in some way, shape, or form, she teaches this to me, of where I am still resisting the experience of being a consciousness that has the access to separation and unity. This is what makes human beings, we're so unique, is we have egos, which give us the experience of separateness, which is the heart, the wound of suffering, as well as the opportunity to experience being in our hearts and being unified with all that is, and knowing everything is all okay. And when you drink ayahuasca, if you're really lucky, you get to be in that joint, awesomely polarizing experience of, oh my God, I'm a separate ego having a crazy experience, and at the same time, I'm one with everything and everything's safe, and I'm completely connected and unified. and everything in between. I mean, this is the gift of her sometimes, is that she gives us the opportunity to be conscious in both directions, separateness and unity. That's a lot to process, you know, for a little body, all of us. And it is what makes humans unique, and it is why ayahuasca and the entire kingdom of plants, animal totems, you name it, they're supporting us, because we are making what is unconscious conscious. And so, in a way, if you ask me what is the number one thing that ayahuasca teaches, it might be the gift of suffering, that it is an act of love from the universe, that it is an opportunity for us to become stronger. And you know what? If we fail, there's no failing, but if we seem to fail a test of suffering, we have all the time in the multiverse to keep trying again and again and again, and it's okay. So suffering is, in a way, our best friend. It is a reflection of what we are resisting, what we came here to learn. And at the same time, I encourage all of us to be incredibly kind and gentle to ourselves and to each other, because it's a very real experience, even if we know there's an element of us doing it to ourselves. It doesn't belittle the fact that it's fucking hard to make our way through the walks through hell that we go through. And there's an expression that ayahuasca says to me all the time when I'm in another experience of hell, whether it is with her, in her embrace, or in life. She says, honey, if you can walk through hell with a smile on your face, everything is heaven. And I love that. It makes me teary when I express that, because that is, to me, the goal of being here on Earth School, is learning to master interacting and working with the intensity of our duality. And that includes the light. The darkness and the light, they're both ridiculously intense. We can resist either one. It kind of doesn't even matter. Intensity is something that is there to help us become masters of saying yes to the experience. And that's, to me, the gift of suffering. And that's why ayahuasca in particular, she's not easy. She's not supposed to be easy. And I see lots of comments coming through here of people who have had experiences recently in the ayahuasca portal and how difficult they are. But how, like Coach Lara is saying, after an experience of deep pain, she felt free. Like, oh, it's the classic breakdown. And in the breakdown, in hell, we think, now I've done it, this is permanent, I'm only going to suffer. My God, I'm stuck here. But then there's a breakthrough coming. And the breakthrough is always worth it. No matter how deep the suffering, no matter how intense the pain, there's a gift for it. You know, we can look back in our lives and look at the hardest things we've ever been through and say, damn, okay, there's so much I learned from that. You know, when we're in the breakdown, it's very hard to have access to that place of trust. It's much easier in hindsight. And so really, what I ask of all of us more and more in this crazy world is, can we please be kind to ourselves and each other as we go through our waves of suffering, our visits into hell, instead of shaming and judging and saying we should know better, or whatever it is that the mind wants to do in order to distract from the intensity of the suffering. If we could learn to be good space holders for each other more and more, which we are, especially those of us working with plant medicines, then we can get to the gift of the suffering much faster than we do when we judge it and we fight it and we deny it and we do all of these mental things that aren't in integrity with the gift of it. So that's my talk today on trying to embrace the intense, crazy journeys that we're having on behalf of Mama Ayahuasca, who celebrates every single possible experience that we could have. I know that when I'm deep in the throes of my suffering with her, she is just as happy as she is when I'm deep in the joy of the light, because she's like, you're alive, you're experiencing something, it's teaching you, you're growing, celebrate that. Easy to say, very hard to do when we are face first in our own version of hell. So that is why I ask that we love on each other, because that's the antidote. Thank you for listening always, always, and for doing this shadow work, this awakening work. It's such an honor to be connected to all of you in raising the vibration of this planet, because it's working. Don't believe the news. It's working. Next week, I'll be sharing some information about the retreats that me and my company are putting on. If you're called to work with ayahuasca in a sacred portal, so I'll be sharing some information about how we work. So I hope to see you then. Thank you for all the amazing love in chat. I love you all back so much. Go out there and celebrate your journeys, and please have safe and happy holidays if you're in the States. Happy Native American Heritage Week. Much love.